What happens when the most dangerous man in the room chooses mercy over fear? Look, I'm gonna be real with you right now. Most of us think power means dominance, right? Like, the louder you are, the harder you hit, the more ruthless you become, that's when people respect you. That's the vibe we've been fed our whole lives. Movies, shows, even the news, they all paint this picture where the guy at the top got there by crushing everyone beneath him. No remorse. No second thoughts. Just cold, calculated control. But here's the thing that's gonna mess with your head a bit. What if that's not real power at all? I mean, think about it for a sec. Anyone can throw their weight around when they've got an army behind them, when they're sitting in a penthouse suite with armed guards at every door, when their name alone makes grown men go silent. That's easy, honestly. That's lazy power. But making the choice to show compassion, to recognize someone's humanity when you could just as easily destroy them without consequence? When you could snap your fingers and ruin their entire existence, but instead you pause. You see them, you choose differently. That's a whole other level, dude. You ever been in a situation where someone had complete control over you? Maybe a boss who could fire you on a whim, a person who held your future in their hands, someone whose opinion could make or break everything you'd worked for. Yeah, you know that feeling, that knot in your stomach, that careful choosing of every single word, that suffocating awareness that you're powerless. It's brutal. It's dehumanizing. And most people in that power position, they feed off it. They love watching you squirm. But every once in a while, and I'm talking super rare here, someone with all that power, all that control, all that feared authority, they hit you with something completely unexpected. A moment of genuine kindness that doesn't make sense given who they are and what they represent. No cameras rolling, no crowd watching, no strategic advantage to gain. Just a raw, honest moment where they see your struggle and decide to act like a human being instead of the monster everyone expects them to be. And that moment, it changes everything. Fika Kamigo 8-0 final on this one, because what I'm about to share with you isn't some Hollywood fairy tale or some motivational speaker's fantasy. This is about real moral conflict, the kind that happens in the shadows, in underground empires, in places where normal rules don't apply and weakness gets you erased. This is about a man who built his entire reputation on being untouchable, unreachable, and absolutely terrifying, and the split-second decision that exposed something he'd buried so deep, even he'd forgotten it was there. You already know how this usually goes, right? The powerful stay powerful by staying heartless. That's the game. That's the code. Break it and you're done. Compassion is weakness. Mercy is a liability. Empathy gets you killed. Except, what if none of that is actually true? What you're about to witness is the kind of story that sticks with you long after it's over, the kind that makes you question everything you thought you knew about strength, authority, and what it really means to have control. Because sometimes the most shocking act of rebellion isn't violence or revenge or some grand explosive gesture. Sometimes, it's just choosing to be kind when cruelty was expected. And when that choice comes from someone who literally answers to no one, who lives outside the boundaries most of us can't even imagine crossing, whose very existence is built on maintaining distance and dominance, well, that's when things get interesting. So before we dive deeper into this, real quick, if you're already feeling this vibe, if this story's pulling you in even just a little bit, do me a solid and hit that like button. Seriously, it helps more than you think. And if you're into these deep, raw stories about morality and power, the kind that make you actually think, smash that subscribe button too. We're building something real here, a community that doesn't settle for surface-level content. Your support keeps these stories coming, and honestly, that means everything. Alright, let's get back into it. So let me paint you a picture here, because this whole thing starts in a place most people never see, and honestly, most people never want to see. We're talking about the kind of establishment where everything looks pristine on the surface, where the marble floors shine so bright you can see your reflection, where the chandeliers cost more than most people make in a decade. It's one of those high-end private clubs in the heart of the city, the kind with no sign out front, just a single black door with a guy in a suit who knows exactly who belongs and who doesn't. Inside, the air itself feels expensive. You know what I'm saying? Like even breathing costs money in there. The walls are dark wood, rich burgundy leather booths line the perimeter, and there's this permanent haze of cigar smoke that somehow smells refined instead of suffocating. Jazz plays low in the background, not the kind from a speaker but from actual musicians tucked in the corner, playing for an audience that barely acknowledges their existence. And sitting in the back corner booth, the one that's always reserved, always empty until he arrives, is Vincent Marcello. Now, if you don't know that name, consider yourself lucky. Because in certain circles, in certain conversations that happen in basements and backrooms, that name carries weight. The kind of weight that makes people check over their shoulders before they even whisper it. Vincent isn't just powerful. He's the kind of powerful where the rules literally bend around him. Cops don't touch him. Politicians take his calls. Businessmen either work with him or they work around him because working against him? That's not an option people choose twice. He's in his mid-50s but he looks like he could still handle himself if things got physical. Not that they ever do anymore. He's past the days of getting his hands dirty. Now he just sits there perfectly still in a tailored suit that probably costs more than a decent used car and watches. That's his thing. He watches, he listens, and every now and then he makes a decision that changes someone's entire reality. Sometimes that reality gets better. Usually it doesn't. Tonight, the usual crew is around him, guys who look like they were built in the same factory, all sharp jawlines and dead eyes, men who've seen things and done things that would keep normal people up at night. They're laughing about something, passing around glasses of whiskey that costs $400 a bottle, celebrating some deal that went their way. Vincent isn't laughing though. He never really does. He just nods occasionally, takes small sips from his glass, and observes everything with this calculating coldness that makes you feel like you're being dissected even when he's not looking directly at you. But here's where it gets interesting, where that first crack in the facade appears. Because while all this luxury and power is on display, while these men who answer to no one are treating this place like their personal kingdom, there's movement in the background that they barely register. A woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, moving between tables with a cleaning cart. She's wearing the standard uniform of the housekeeping staff. Simple, dark, forgettable. Her name tag says Maria, but nobody's reading it. Nobody's even really seeing her. She moves quietly, efficiently, collecting empty glasses, wiping down surfaces that are already clean, staying invisible the way people in her position learn to stay invisible. Because that's the survival skill, right? When you exist in spaces where powerful people gather, you become a ghost. You don't make eye contact, you don't speak unless spoken to, and you definitely don't draw attention to yourself. The moment you become visible is the moment you become a problem and problems get removed. But something happens as Maria moves past Vincent's table. One of his guys, this younger dude, maybe early 30s, trying way too hard to prove himself, he's gesturing wildly while telling some story, and his hand knocks over a glass. Whiskey splashes across the table, starts dripping onto the floor, and the whole booth goes quiet. Not like concerned quiet, more like irritated quiet. Like this small accident just became someone else's inconvenience. Maria's there in seconds, dropping to her knees with a cloth, soaking up the spill before it spreads further. She's moving fast, apologizing even though she didn't do anything wrong, because that's the reflex when you're powerless. You apologize for existing in the same space as other people's mistakes. The young guy who knocked over the glass? He doesn't apologize. He just leans back, watches her clean up his mess, and makes some comment under his breath that gets a few chuckles from the others. And here's where you'd expect Vincent to do nothing, right? Because men like him, they don't involve themselves in these tiny dramas. They're above it. They have people to handle the people who handle the problems. Except Vincent does something that stops everyone at that table. He reaches into his jacket pocket, and for a split second there's this collective tension because when a man like Vincent reaches into his jacket people notice, but he just pulls out $100 bill. Places it on the table. Pushes it toward where Maria is still kneeling, still frantically cleaning. "For your trouble," he says. His voice is quiet, controlled, but it cuts through the jazz music and the low conversations like a blade. Maria looks up, and this is crucial, she makes eye contact with him. Just for a second, but it's there. And in that second, there's something that passes between them that nobody else at the table understands. It's not gratitude on her face. It's not relief. It's something more complicated, something that looks almost like recognition? Like she's seeing something in him that contradicts everything his reputation suggests. She doesn't take the money. Just finishes cleaning, stands up, nods once, respectfully but not subserviently, and moves on to the next table. The $100 bill just sits there untouched. And Vincent doesn't push it. Doesn't call her back. Just watches her go with this unreadable expression that his crew can't quite figure out. The young guy who spilled the drink? He's confused. "Boss, she didn't even..." "Leave it," Vincent says. Not angry, not loud. Just final. The conversation dies immediately. Now, most people would miss what just happened there. They'd see a rich guy trying to tip someone who rejected it, no big deal, life moves on. But if you're paying attention, if you understand power dynamics and unspoken communication, you just witnessed something way more complex. Because Maria didn't reject money out of pride or stubbornness. She rejected it because she understood what accepting it would mean. It would frame their interaction as transactional, would reduce what happened to a simple exchange. And for reasons nobody at that table can comprehend yet, that interaction meant something different to both of them. Over the next hour, the club continues its rhythm. Vincent conducts business, makes decisions, projects authority. But every so often his gaze drifts, not obviously, not in a way anyone would call him on, but it drifts to where Maria is working across the room. And if you could see inside his head right now, you'd realize he's somewhere else entirely. He's in another club, decades ago, watching a different woman in a similar uniform, moving with that same quiet dignity through spaces that treated her like furniture. His mother. Before the money, before the power, before any of this. When she cleaned offices in downtown buildings, coming home at 3 in the morning with swollen feet and stories about invisible humiliations she'd never complain about but he could see in her eyes. That transformation, from the son of that woman to the man in this booth, it cost him pieces of himself he can't even name anymore. And sitting here now, watching Maria move through this room with that same exhausted grace, something in him cracks open that he'd sealed shut a long time ago. But here's the tension building underneath all this surface calm. Vincent's world doesn't allow for sentimentality. Doesn't allow for these kinds of reflections. The moment you start seeing people as people instead of assets or obstacles, you've already lost. His entire empire is built on maintaining distance, on being willing to make decisions others can't make, on never letting emotion compromise strategy. So when Maria finishes her shift and heads toward the service exit, and Vincent finds himself standing up, actually standing up, which makes everyone at his table go silent because he never leaves until he's ready to leave, nobody knows what's happening, including Vincent himself. Comment below, things are getting intense. He follows her. Not obviously, not in a way that would alert his security or make anyone think something's off. Vincent just mutters something about needing air, waves off the concerns and moves through the club with that same controlled pace he always maintains. But internally, there's something happening that he can't quite name, this pull toward a truth he's been avoiding for so long it's become part of his operating system. The service hallway is a completely different world from the main club. The walls are concrete instead of wood paneling, the lighting is harsh fluorescent instead of warm amber, and there's no jazz music back here, just the hum of industrial ventilation and the distant clatter of kitchen staff wrapping up for the night. Maria's at her locker, changing out of her work shoes into worn sneakers that have seen better days, and she doesn't notice him at first. When she does, when she turns and sees Vincent Marcello standing there in this space where people like him never go, her body language shifts instantly. Not scared exactly, but alert. Guarded. Because even though he showed her something resembling kindness earlier, she's not naive. She knows what men like him are capable of, knows that kindness from power is often just the setup for a different kind of cruelty. "Mr. Marcello," she says, and her voice is steady but quiet. Respectful but not submissive. There's a dignity in how she holds herself that's fascinating to watch, especially in contrast to how everyone else responds to him. "Maria." He says her name like he's testing it out, like he's acknowledging that she's a person with an identity beyond her function in this building. And that alone is weird enough that she tilts her head slightly, trying to figure out what game is being played here. There's this silence that stretches between them, and it's loaded with all this unspoken complexity. Vincent's trying to find words for something he doesn't usually have to explain, and Maria's trying to decide how much vulnerability she can afford in this moment. Because vulnerability around powerful men? That's usually a mistake that costs you something you can't get back. "You didn't take the money," Vincent finally says, and it's not an accusation. It's more like he's genuinely trying to understand. "No sir, I didn't." Maria's hands are clasped in front of her, and there's this quiet strength in her posture that suggests she's been through enough in life that intimidation doesn't work on her the way it works on most people. Wasn't necessary. It was $100 for 30 seconds of work. Most people would call that necessary. Most people aren't me. And the way she says it, not defensive, not proud, just factual, it hits different. It's the kind of statement that comes from someone who's reconciled with exactly who they are and what they're worth, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Vincent finds himself doing something he rarely does anymore. He's genuinely curious. Not strategically curious, not calculating the angles curious, but humanly curious about another person's perspective. Why not? Maria considers him for a long moment, and you can see her making a decision about how honest she's going to be. And maybe it's because they're in this industrial hallway instead of the polished club, or maybe it's because she's too tired to perform the usual dance of deference, but she chooses honesty. "Because I saw your face when you looked at me," she says quietly. "And for just a second, you weren't looking at the help. You were looking at someone who reminded you of something real. And I didn't want to cheapen that by turning it into a transaction. She pauses, then adds, my mother used to clean offices. I know what it looks like when someone actually sees you versus when they're just going through motions. And there it is. The truth occulta that Vincent has been running from, stated plainly by someone who has no reason to protect his feelings. She saw through him in that moment at the table, recognized something in his expression that his own crew missed entirely. And instead of exploiting it or dismissing it, she honored it by refusing the money. By maintaining the authenticity of that brief human connection instead of reducing it to economics. Vincent feels something shift in his chest, this uncomfortable recognition that he's been seen in a way he hasn't allowed himself to be seen in decades. And the wild thing is, it's not from someone in his world, not from a rival boss or a corrupt politician or even from his own inner circle. It's from a woman who cleans tables for minimum wage and tips, someone his entire organization would classify as irrelevant. My mother, he hears himself saying, and the words feel foreign in his mouth because he never talks about her. Never. It's an unspoken rule that his past doesn't exist, that Vincent Marcello emerged fully formed as the man he is now. She did the same work. Different city, different era, but same work. Maria nods, and there's this understanding in her eyes that doesn't need elaboration. She gets it. She gets that the distance between who he was and who he became isn't something he's proud of. That transformation sometimes means abandoning the very people whose struggle motivated you to transform in the first place. She'd be proud of you, Maria says softly, and it's such a simple statement but it lands like a physical blow. Because Vincent knows with absolute certainty, that it's a lie. His mother wouldn't be proud of the things he's done, the compromises he's made, the coldness he's cultivated. She'd be heartbroken. And Maria knows he knows it's a lie, but she offers it anyway, like a gift he doesn't deserve but might need. Before Vincent can respond, footsteps echo down the hallway. It's one of his guys, the same young one who spilled the drink earlier, looking confused and slightly concerned about why the boss is back here having a conversation with housekeeping staff. Everything good, boss? He asks, and there's this edge to his voice that suggests he's ready to handle any problem, to remove any inconvenience. Vincent straightens up, and just like that, the mask slides back into place. The moment of vulnerability vanishes, replaced by the cold authority everyone expects from him. Fine. Head back inside. I'll be there in a minute. The guy hesitates, glances at Maria with barely concealed suspicion, but ultimately nods and leaves. Because you don't question Vincent. Ever. Once they're alone again, the dynamic has shifted. The brief window of authentic connection is closing, and both of them can feel it. Vincent is already retreating back into his role, and Maria is already preparing to become invisible again. This is how their worlds work. Brief intersections followed by inevitable separation. But then Maria does something that changes everything. She reaches into her own bag and pulls out a small, worn photograph. Hands it to Vincent without explanation. It's old, faded at the edges, and it shows a younger Maria, maybe in her 20s, standing next to an older woman in a cleaning uniform. They're both smiling, both exhausted, but there's this fierce pride in their expressions. My mother and me, Maria says quietly. Last photo before she passed. She taught me that dignity isn't about what you do for a living. It's about how you carry yourself while you do it. She pauses, meets his eyes directly. And she taught me that power without compassion is just violence wearing a suit. Vincent stares at the photograph, and something inside him that's been frozen for decades starts to crack. Because Maria just handed him a mirror, showed him exactly what he's lost in his climb to the top. And the devastating part is that she did it with kindness, with this gentle honesty that cuts deeper than any threat or accusation ever could. He hands the photo back carefully, like it's something sacred, and when he speaks his voice is rougher than usual. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. And she would have liked you. Maria tucks the photo back into her bag. The real you, I mean. Not the version you show everyone else. And that's the revelation that's gonna stick with him, the idea that there's still a real him, somewhere underneath all the calculated cruelty and strategic decisions. That maybe transformation doesn't have to mean complete abandonment of who you used to be. Now, if you've ever been in a position where someone saw through all your defenses and just acknowledged the person you're hiding, drop a comment about it. Because that kind of recognition, that moment when someone refuses to accept your mask and insists on seeing your humanity, that changes things in ways you can't predict. And what happens next in this hallway is gonna challenge everything you think you know about power and choice. Write this down. I understand that. What happens in the next 48 hours is something Vincent's organization will talk about in hushed tones for years afterward, though nobody will ever fully understand why it happened or what it really meant. Because the decision Vincent makes, standing in that industrial hallway with Maria's words still echoing in his head, it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no grand gesture, no public announcement, no obvious shift in his demeanor when he returns to that booth where his crew is waiting. He just sits down, finishes his drink, and conducts business exactly like he always does. But internally there's a war happening. A complete recalibration of priorities that goes against every survival instinct he's developed over 3 decades of operating in a world where sentiment gets you killed. Because here's what most people don't understand about power at that level: it's not just about having control, it's about maintaining a specific image of control. The moment you show weakness, the moment you deviate from the character everyone expects you to play, that's when the vultures start circling. And Vincent has enemies. Serious ones. People who would love nothing more than to see him slip, to find a crack in that armor and exploit it until the whole structure collapses. So when he starts asking questions the next morning, questions about Maria, about her situation, about why she's working nights at her age when most people are thinking about retirement, his right-hand man, a guy named Tony who's been with him since the beginning, he gets this look on his face like he's watching his boss have a stroke in real time. "Boss, respectfully, why do we care about the cleaning lady?" Tony's sitting across from Vincent in the private office, the one with bulletproof windows overlooking the city, and he's trying to understand what game is being played here. Because in their world, everything is a game. Every move has an angle, every kindness is strategy, every question is a test. Vincent doesn't answer immediately. He's looking out at the city, at the thousands of buildings packed with millions of people living lives he stopped thinking about the moment he decided that empathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. And somewhere in those buildings, Maria's probably getting ready for another shift, another night of being invisible to people who think their convenience matters more than her dignity. "Just get me the information," Vincent says finally, and his tone makes it clear the conversation is over. Tony leaves, confused and concerned, but he does what he's told. Because that's how this works. Vincent gives orders, people follow them, and questions are for people who don't value their position. The information comes back within hours, and it's exactly what Vincent expected and somehow worse than he imagined. Maria's been working 3 jobs for the past 2 years. The club at night, a grocery store in the morning, and weekend shifts at a laundromat. She's 61 years old, living in a rent-controlled apartment that's still eating up most of her income, and she's doing all of this to pay for her grandson's medical treatments. The kid's got some condition that requires expensive medication, the kind that insurance companies find creative ways not to cover, and Maria's daughter, the kid's mother, she's dealing with her own health issues that make working impossible. So Maria's carrying this entire family on her back, 3 generations of struggle compressed into one woman's exhausted shoulders, and she does it without complaining, without asking for help, without compromising that dignity her mother taught her to maintain no matter what. Vincent reads through the report twice, and there's this moment where he could easily just close the folder, file it away, and return to his regularly scheduled life of calculated indifference. Nobody would judge him for it. Nobody would even know he briefly considered caring. But that photograph Maria showed him, that image of her and her mother, both in cleaning uniforms, both proud despite everything, it stuck in his head like a splinter he can't remove. And here's where the real moral complexity comes in, where the decision gets interesting. Because Vincent has the resources to solve Maria's problems instantly. He could write a check right now that would cover her grandson's medical bills for life, set up her daughter with proper health care, give Maria herself enough money to retire comfortably. Easy. Done. Problem solved. But doing that, just throwing money at the situation, it would reduce everything to a transaction. It would make Maria's struggles just another line item in his ledger of charitable donations, another feel-good story he could tell himself to justify all the other things he does. And somehow, that feels worse than doing nothing at all. Because Maria saw him. Actually saw him, saw past the reputation and the power to whatever fragment of authentic humanity he's got left. And responding to that recognition with cash feels like a betrayal of what that moment meant. So Vincent does something that makes even less sense to everyone around him. He shows up at the club the next night, earlier than usual, and he waits. Just sits in that back booth by himself, no crew, no security hovering obviously nearby, just him and a glass of whiskey he doesn't drink. And when Maria arrives for her shift, when she sees him sitting there alone, there's this flicker of concern in her expression because abnormal behavior from powerful men usually means danger for people in her position. She approaches cautiously, keeping her body language neutral, and Vincent gestures to the seat across from him. An invitation, not an order. And that distinction matters more than you might think, because orders are about power and invitations are about choice, and Vincent's giving her the option to refuse without consequence. Maria sits, but she's clearly uncomfortable, clearly aware that everyone in the club is watching this bizarre interaction and trying to figure out what it means. The staff, the security, the few early patrons, they're all witnessing something that breaks the unspoken rules of how these social hierarchies function. "I know about your grandson," Vincent says quietly, and Maria's face goes carefully blank. Because in her world, when powerful people know your vulnerabilities, that information usually gets weaponized. "And your daughter. And the 3 jobs." Maria doesn't respond immediately. She's calculating, trying to figure out where this is going, what's being asked of her, what she might have to give up in exchange for whatever's about to be offered. "I don't need charity, Mr. Marcello," she finally says, and her voice is steady even though her hands are clasped tight in her lap. "I appreciate whatever concern you might have, but I handle my own. I'm not offering charity." Vincent leans forward slightly, and there's something in his expression that's hard to read. Not pity, not condescension, but something more complicated. "I'm offering a job. My mother," he pauses like saying this out loud cost him something. "She spent 30 years cleaning buildings downtown. Never complained, never asked for help, worked herself into an early grave trying to maintain dignity in a world that treated her like furniture." Maria's expression shifts slightly, recognition flickering in her eyes because she understands exactly what he's describing. She's lived it. "I couldn't help her," Vincent continues, and there's this rawness in his voice that his organization has never heard before. "By the time I had resources, by the time I had power, she was already gone. And I tell myself I built all this for her, to honor what she went through, but that's garbage. I built this for me. To prove something, to escape something, to become someone who wouldn't have to apologize for existing in spaces where people like us weren't supposed to be." The truth he's speaking right now, it's the kind of revelation that could be used against him, that shows fault lines in his carefully constructed image. And he's sharing it with Maria, with this woman who has every reason not to trust him and no obligation to care about his complicated relationship with his own past. "So here's what I'm proposing," Vincent says, and he slides a business card across the table. Not cash, not a check, just a card with a name and number. "That's my personal attorney. He specializes in medical advocacy, fighting insurance companies, finding programs and resources that actually help. You call him, you tell him I sent you, and he'll handle everything related to your grandson's treatment. No strings, no favors owed, no expectations." Maria stares at the card like it might explode. "And the job," Vincent continues, "is for your daughter. Administrative work, good pay, health benefits that actually cover things, flexible hours. Nothing that requires her to pretend she's not dealing with health issues. Honest work with humane conditions." The silence that follows is loaded with suspicion and hope in equal measure, because offers like this don't exist in Maria's world without massive catches attached. There's always a cost, always some compromise of dignity or safety or autonomy that makes the help not worth having. "Why?" Maria asks simply, and it's the same question Tony asked, the same question Vincent's been asking himself. Why risk the reputation? Why show this kind of vulnerability? Why care about one family's struggle when there are millions struggling, and caring about all of them would paralyze you completely? Vincent takes a breath, and what he says next is going to change how Maria sees power forever, is going to challenge every assumption she's made about what it means when someone has control and how they choose to use it. Comment below, looking forward to knowing. "Because you reminded me that I'm still my mother's son," Vincent says, and his voice carries this weight that makes the whole club feel smaller somehow, like the world just contracted to this one conversation. "And if I can't honor her memory by being the kind of man she raised me to be, then all of this," he gestures vaguely at the expensive surroundings, the empire he's built, "all of this is just elaborate cowardice dressed up as success." Maria's eyes glisten slightly, but she doesn't cry. She just nods slowly, understanding landing in her expression like she's watching someone find their way back from being lost. And then she does something that nobody in Vincent's world would ever dare to do. She reaches across the table and places her hand over his. Not romantically, not strategically, just human to human. One person acknowledging another person's struggle to remain decent in circumstances that reward indecency. "Your mother would be proud of this choice," Maria says quietly, and this time it's not a comforting lie. This time it's the truth, and they both know it. Vincent doesn't pull his hand away immediately. He lets this moment exist, this bizarre intersection of two completely different lives finding common ground in the memory of women who cleaned buildings and raised children and maintained dignity when the world gave them every excuse not to. And everyone watching, the staff, the security, the early patrons, They're witnessing something they can't fully comprehend, this silent revolution happening in a back booth over untouched whiskey and a business card. When Maria finally takes the card, when she tucks it carefully into her pocket like it's something precious, Vincent feels something shift inside him that he can't quite name. It's not redemption because he's done too much for one good deed to balance the scales. It's not absolution because Maria's not a priest and this isn't confession. It's more like permission. Permission to be complicated, to contain contradictions, to be both the man who built an empire on calculated ruthlessness and the boy who watched his mother come home exhausted and still insisted on making him breakfast before she slept. Over the next few weeks, things happen that Vincent's organization notices but can't quite explain. The attorney handles Maria's grandson's case, and suddenly insurance companies that were stonewalling start cooperating, specialists who had 6-month waiting lists find openings, and treatments that were financially impossible become accessible. Maria's daughter gets the administrative job, and she's treated with actual respect instead of the performative kindness that disappears the moment it's inconvenient. And Maria herself, she keeps working at the club, but now it's because she wants to, not because survival demands it. But here's where the real impact shows up, where Vincent's choice creates ripples that go way beyond one family's situation. Because Tony and the rest of the crew, they're watching all this happen, watching their boss make decisions that don't fit the usual calculating framework, and it's making them question things they stopped questioning a long time ago. Not out loud, not in ways that would challenge the hierarchy, but internally. In those quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts and can't hide from who you've become. One night, about a month after that conversation with Maria, Vincent's in the club again and he notices something different. One of his younger guys, not the one who spilled the drink but another one mid-20s trying to prove himself, he's helping an older server carry a heavy tray instead of just watching her struggle. It's a small thing, barely noticeable, but Vincent sees it. And when the young guy catches Vincent watching, there's this moment of uncertainty on his face, like he's not sure if showing basic human decency is going to be interpreted as weakness. Vincent just nods. What? Barely perceptible. But that nod contains entire paragraphs of unspoken permission. It says, yeah, you can be strong and kind. You can have power and use it to help instead of hurt. You can operate in this world without becoming a monster. And that young guy, he straightens up a little, like a weight just lifted off his shoulders that he didn't even know he was carrying. Because mentality matters, right? The beliefs we carry about what strength looks like, about what power requires, about who deserves dignity and who doesn't, those beliefs shape everything. And Vincent just gave permission for a different set of beliefs to exist within his organization. But not everyone's happy about this transformation. There's resistance, obviously, because any deviation from established norms creates anxiety in systems built on predictability. Some of the older guys, they're nervous. They've spent decades operating under one set of rules, and now those rules seem to be shifting in ways they don't understand. And in Vincent's world, confusion is dangerous. Unpredictability gets people hurt. Tony pulls Vincent aside one evening, and his face has this expression that suggests he's about to say something he's been rehearsing for days. They're in the private office again, just the two of them, and Tony's doing that thing where he's choosing his words carefully because challenging Vincent, even respectfully, is always a risk. Boss, I gotta ask, what's the end game here? Tony's leaning against the desk, arms crossed, trying to look casual but clearly stressed. Because people are talking. Not disrespectfully, but they're confused. And confused people make mistakes. Vincent's quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth he wants to share versus how much strategic ambiguity to maintain. Because leadership in his world has always been about projecting certainty even when you're figuring things out as you go. The end game, Vincent finally says, is that I'm tired of being the villain in my own story. I'm tired of looking in the mirror and seeing someone my mother wouldn't recognize. And if that makes people uncomfortable, if that creates confusion, then maybe we've been doing things wrong for a long time and nobody had the guts to say it. Tony processes this, and you can see him struggling with it because it challenges fundamental assumptions about how power works, about what keeps organizations like theirs intact. But boss, kindness, it looks like weakness. You know that. And weakness gets exploited. Kindness without power is just sentiment, Vincent replies, and there's this edge to his voice now, the authority coming back through. But power without kindness is just brutality. And I've been brutal long enough to know it doesn't actually solve anything. It just creates bigger problems that require more brutality to manage. It's a cycle that ends with you alone, surrounded by people who fear you but don't respect you, waiting for the moment they can take what you've built. This is the revelation that's going to stick with Tony, the idea that fear-based loyalty has an expiration date, that eventually everyone gets tired or desperate or ambitious enough to challenge brutality. But loyalty built on respect, on being treated like a human being with dignity and value, that's more durable. Harder to build, sure, but harder to break too. So what do you want from us? Tony asks, and it's a genuine question. He's not being difficult, he's trying to understand how to operate in this new framework. I want you to remember that everyone you interact with is someone's mother, someone's son, someone's family, Vincent says. I want you to make decisions that you could explain to a kid without feeling ashamed. And I want you to understand that real power, the kind that lasts, comes from people choosing to follow you because they believe in who you are, not because they're terrified of what you'll do if they don't. It's a completely different operating philosophy than what Vincent's organization has functioned on for decades, and implementing it isn't going to be clean or easy. There will be resistance, there will be people who can't adapt, there will be consequences for showing mercy in a world that's built on punishment. But Vincent's made his choice and he's committed to seeing it through even if it costs him everything. Because here's what he realized in that hallway with Maria, what her simple dignity and her mother's photograph made impossible to ignore. Transformation isn't about becoming someone else entirely. It's about reconnecting with the parts of yourself you abandoned because you thought they made you weak. It's about integrating the boy who loved his mother with the man who built an empire. It's about being whole instead of fragmented, authentic instead of performative. And the wildest part of all this, the thing that Vincent's crew is starting to understand even if they can't articulate it yet, is that this version of their boss, this complicated man who contains both ruthlessness and compassion, who can be dangerous and kind, who refuses to pretend those contradictions don't exist. He's actually scarier than the purely brutal version. Because unpredictability born from genuine complexity is way more threatening than predictable violence. When people can't categorize you, can't reduce you to a simple formula, they have to actually pay attention. They have to treat you as a full human being instead of a manageable threat. Maria understands this instinctively, which is why she wasn't afraid of Vincent even when she probably should have been. She saw past the reputation to the internal conflict, and she refused to pretend that conflict didn't exist just to make him more comfortable with his own choices. And that refusal, that insistence on treating him as a complete person rather than a caricature of power, it gave him permission to stop performing and start being. The impact of all this is still unfolding, still creating ripples that will take years to fully manifest. But standing in his office now, looking out at the city where his mother once worked herself to death trying to maintain dignity in impossible circumstances, Vincent feels something he hasn't felt in decades. Hope that maybe, just maybe, power and decency aren't actually mutually exclusive. That maybe you can build something that lasts without sacrificing every piece of your humanity to make it happen. Write this down, this changed my perspective. Look, if you made it all the way to the end of this story, that means something. It means you're not just here for quick entertainment or surface-level drama. You're here because stories like this, the ones that challenge what we think we know about power, dignity, and what it really means to be strong, they resonate with something deeper in you. And honestly, that's exactly the kind of community we're building here. So if this hit different for you, if Vincent's journey from calculated coldness to conscious compassion made you think about your own choices, your own relationship with power, whether that's power over others or just power over your own life, then stick around. Hit that subscribe button because we're going to keep exploring these moral complexities, these moments where humanity shows up in unexpected places and forces us to reconsider everything we thought was solid. And drop a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you were really here, that you felt this story the way I felt it when I put it together. Your engagement, the comments, the conversations we have down there, that's what makes this channel more than just content. It's what makes it a community of people who aren't afraid to sit with uncomfortable truths and complicated emotions. If you haven't already, tap that like button too. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, that depth and substance still have a place in a world that's constantly pushing us towards shallow, forgettable content. Your like literally helps more people find these narratives and maybe, just maybe, see power and kindness in a whole new light. And hey, there's another story waiting for you right here that digs even deeper into this whole concept of unexpected compassion from unlikely places. It's going to challenge you in different ways, hit different emotional notes, but it's got that same energy we just explored together. So click on that next video and let's keep this conversation going. I'll see you there.